Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 10 of our reading of Neptune 1 is Missing. It is a book by Hugh Walters, and let me find the copyright information here inside the book. It says Neptune 1 is Missing, copyright 1969 by Hugh Walters, first American edition. All rights reserved, including the right to reproduce this book or portions thereof in any form. Okay, so we are going to continue. Anyways, Tony helped to repair two of the hypothermia couches, so at least two of them of the crew could survive. And then he basically decided to walk out the airlock and so to make Chris's choice easier. So they were all looking for Tony, and now they're all going to do a spacewalk and see if they can find him. So yeah. Chris, Serge, and Maury stepped out into space. Neptune 1 seemed to be hanging motionless on one side in black shadow and the other brilliantly illuminated by the distant dazzling sun. All around were clusters of clouds of innumerable pinpoints of light, several of them much brighter and larger than the rest. Those were the planets, and one of the smallest would be Earth. But the astronauts were not interested at that moment in the awesome scene around them. They were looking for a source of light that was neither star or planet. There he is, Maury yelled over the radio, and about a mile from the ship they saw through the utter clarity of empty space the illuminated figure of Tony. He was floating along parallel to Neptune 1 within easy reach with the aid of their jet guns. They sped towards him. Tony was floating along with his eyes closed. Suddenly he felt something. A hand had grabbed him, and then another and another. He opened his eyes to see his three companions all holding on to him. Joy at seeing his friends was mixed with chagrin that they had discovered him so soon, and the knowledge that they were all back to square one. The argument would start all over again. Tony knew it was no use trying to shake off the hold of his friends. Neither could he escape without his jet gun, for he could see they had theirs. Chris was gesturing to him, for by now he knew his radio was not working. One by one they passed through the airlock into the cabin, which Tony had thought he would never see again. For a time the four astronauts were busy removing their spacesuits, but after a while they were packed away in the locker, and they had to face each other. Everyone waited for Chris to speak, and Chris didn't know what to say. Tony, he said at last, we know what you were doing. I decided to do the same, but you beat me to it. I gather Maury and Serge each had a similar plan. Now, if we'd all carried out our decision, there would have been no one left on the ship, and what would have been the good of that? Tony was about to launch into a plea to be allowed to be sacrificed, for he believed he was the least valuable member of the crew, but Chris forestalled him. This thing has got to be talked out together, he said quickly. We all know what the position is. Two of us can survive, two cannot. I'm sure we'd all be prepared to take a one-way walk into space, but we must decide rationally who's to do it. Have you thought, Chris, how the two survivors will feel? Serge asked quietly. I don't want to be one of them. Nor I, Maury burst out. I couldn't face life with that on my mind. Chris swallowed hard. He looked intently at his three great friends. Are you saying, he said quietly, that because we can't all live, all four of us should slip through the airlock together? Yes. Chris was startled at the vehemence and unanimity of his friend's reply. But it's your duty to return, he protested. A report must be made to control. What could be said? What could be said that we can't send over the radio? Maury asked. But the ship, it must return to Earth for examination. If the maneuver worked out by the Cape doesn't come off, the ship won't get back. If it does, Control can bring in the ship without our help, Surge reminded the leader. We've always been together, Tony insisted, and we must be together to the end. Let's step out with arms linked and keep it that way. Let me think, Chris said. The flight program that had been worked out for Neptune 1 was a risky one because the ship's lateral rockets were out of action. It couldn't be turned to order. The scientists at Cape Kennedy were staking everything on the gamble that because the rear end of the ship with its atomic reactor was more massive than the rest, the planet's gravity would turn it. They believed that if this happened soon enough, the ship could be decelerated considerably. However, it would still be traveling far more rapidly than had been planned, so would have to approach the planet's surface very closely. The margin of error was very small indeed, but it was the only chance. At one time, Sir George seriously considered ordering the astronauts to try and turn their ship by using their small jet guns, but he had to reject this idea because of the lack of control. It would be a 1,000,000 to 1 chance against Neptune 1 being positioned accurately. More likely, it would be set spinning helplessly, and all possibility of its being set on a course back to Earth would have vanished. No, it would have to be the close planetary approach or nothing. But now that was settled, his thoughts inevitably reverted to the greatest problem of all, the crew. Would he have to make the terrible choice, or would they decide themselves? The matter could be postponed no longer. He would call Neptune 1 and make his offer. Tony, Chris asked, can the AHA be operated manually? Sorry. Yes, Tony answered wonderingly, but someone would have to be responsible for setting it going. That's just it, Chris exclaimed. Anyone conscious in the cabin could switch the AHA on and off. What's on your mind, Chris? Maury asked. It's just a mad idea that we might keep together for some time yet, Chris replied. If we took it in turns, 2 by 2, to use the couches, we'd last a lot longer. But what would be the use? Asked Surge. We still couldn't last out. I know that, fathead, Chris answered. But it's the only alternative to all stepping out of the ship now, if we want to keep together. We could try it, said Tony. I can rig up the AHA for working by hand. You are suggesting that 2 of us get frozen while the other 2 keep conscious. Yes, and when the conscious pair can stick it no longer, they defrost the other 2 and take their place, inquired Surge. That's it in a nutshell. This could go on until all the food has gone. Then we could all fade out together. What do you say, fellows? For myself, I don't mind what we do. If we all do it, Maury answered. But what's to stop the pair that remains conscious from sneaking out of the ship while the other 2 are frosted up? There'd be nothing to stop them except a promise to the others, answered Chris. If we promise each other, we'd play it straight, I'm sure. You don't think that the desire of one of us to sacrifice himself for the others would be an absolution for breaking such a promise? Surge asked quietly. No, I don't. If we give our word to each other, that's more binding than anything, Chris said. But we can easily counter that. We'd all pledge that if any pair of us woke up to find the other 2 had broken their solemn promise, then the survivors too would step out into space. So it would be useless hopping out while 2 of us were in the fridge, declared Maury. It would be a wasted gesture. It would, Chris pointed out. So what about it, fellows? One by one, the crew all agreed to try out Chris's scheme. True, it only put off the inevitable end, but at least it would prolong till the last possible moment their time together. Once the decision had been taken and the pledges given, they began to plan the operation with enthusiasm. While Chris was informing Control of what they were about to do, Tony was making certain adjustments to the automatic hypothermia apparatus. He rigged up a switch so that it could be made to freeze or defrost at will. Then he demonstrated it to all his companions. Chris, shall we gobble our food up or shall we make it last as long as possible? He asked. We'll spin it out, the leaders answered firmly. I thought the whole idea of the scheme was to hang on together for as long as we can. You'll have to curb your appetite, my friend. All right, as long as we know, sighed Tony. As we Are we going to work out a program? Chris nodded, and the quartet spent an interesting time drawing up a rota. They decided that to lessen the monotony for the two who were conscious, there should be a constant change of companion. As to their food, they would try one small meal in each 24 hours. The pair under hypothermia wouldn't, of course, need to eat during their spell. There would be one change from the routine. All four astronauts would observe their circuit round the planet. If there had been an error in Control's calculation, they would plunge into Neptune together. If not, they would resume their routine while the ship sped back towards Earth. At last, when they all felt too weak to carry on, they would settle down for the last time on their contour couches and wait for life to slip away from them one by one. Tony and Maury were selected to be the first pair to be frozen. Chris and Serge saw them safely on the two repaired hypothermia couches. Then they went back to the main cabin, and Chris set the AHA in motion. It's only putting off the inevitable, Sir George Benson sighed after he'd received Chris's message. I'm not surprised that they refuse to be separated. At least I don't have that dreadful decision to make. I should like to have seen just two of them again, Whiskers said sadly. Well, we will get a verbal description of Neptune, Professor Boronoff said practically. That is more than we expected. Hang Neptune, said Sir George burst out. I'd rather have had those four lads back and learn anything about the wretched planet. Chapter 15. The spaceship was approaching the planet after which it had been named. In one sense, it was nearing the end of a journey on which it had set out so hopefully many months before. Inside the main cabin, Serge and Chris lay quietly on their contour couches. Only an occasional word would pass between them, for movement and speech consumed energy, and they had decided to conserve it as long as possible. Up above, Tony and Maury were in the quote-unquote fridge, and in another 6 hours it would be time to defrost Tony and for Serge to take his place. Ever since they had decided to hang on to life for as long as they could, the crew had faithfully carried out the routine they had agreed on at regular intervals. At regular intervals, there was a change of companions so that all shared equally in the tedious vigils of consciousness and the swift oblivion of hypothermia. The consumption of food had been cut to a bare minimum. At first, a crewman who had just been aroused would have a moderate meal and would then only touch food once every 24 hours until it was his turn to be frosted again. But now, perhaps because of their growing weakness, they did not bother about eating when they began their spell of unconsciousness. When they began their spell of consciousness, rather. Sometimes it was an effort to eat at all, but some food was necessary so that the duty pair would have enough strength to leave their couches, to broadcast a routine message to the Cape, and to operate the AHA. Chris and Serge were much thinner than they had been some weeks ago. The crew's calorie intake was much below the level required to sustain life at a normal level. Gradually, their bodies were consuming reserves of fat to augment that supplied by food. Because the change had begun gradually, they hadn't noticed it much at first, but now when one of them was aroused from hypothermia, he could see the difference in the companions. He seemed to have left but a few moments before. Control kept up a stream of anxious inquiries about them, and they always assured Sir George and his colleagues that they were all well, but even across all those millions of miles, the growing weakness of their voices betrayed the truth. Surge's eyes strayed constantly toward the chronometer, and that was ticking their lives away. Only a very short time now before he had the precious oblivion of hypothermia. As time had passed, the crew found themselves yearning more and more for their time to climb into the quote unquote fridge, although each spell in the deep freeze passed in a flash. It was a welcome change from lying for hours and hours in the main cabin. Control calling Neptune 1, Mr. Gilliander's voice suddenly came over the loudspeaker. We shall be igniting the chemical rocket in 120 minutes from now. It was nearly a minute before Chris had grasped the full significance of the message. With increasing weakness, he knew his brain was working more slowly. The message was repeated several times, for Control guessed what was happening. We must be near Neptune. We must have turned around, he exclaimed to Serge. For many days they hadn't made any external observations, and with none of their instruments working, they had no idea how close they were to the giant planet. Neither had they noticed the slow turning of the spaceship, which was caused by Neptune's gravity. Just as Control had predicted, so it seemed, that they would soon be decelerating and going into a close orbit round the huge, mysterious world. In spite of his exhaustion, Chris felt a surge of excitement passing through him. They would be the first human beings to see Neptune closely. Perhaps they would learn the answer to mysteries which had puzzled astronomers since the planet was discovered in 1846. Painfully, Chris and Serge dragged themselves to an observation port. At first, they could see nothing, but turning the lens revealed the vast white planet below them. The ship was positioned so that the chemical motor, with its powerful thrust, would slow down their headlong rush towards the vast icy world. As they looked at it, Neptune appeared to be an almost perfect sphere, and already it was so far from the sun, the frozen methane particles of its atmosphere made it almost glisten. Strangely enough, the polar regions looked darker than the equatorial belt. No surface features could be seen from that distance. After a time, Chris and Serge walked back to their couches. It was not until he had nearly reached his that Chris made an amazing discovery. He was actually walking on the cabin floor and not floating. Serge, he called out in wonder, do you realize the atomic motor is running? We're already slowing down. The Russian hadn't noticed the gentle gravity induced by the steady thrust of the ion drive. For a time, the two astronauts speculated how long ago this might have happened, and why they hadn't noticed before. Neither could remember, for they knew that their minds were not working clearly in their weakened condition. Control must have switched on the moment the ship was in the correct position. Already for hours, perhaps for many days, Neptune 1 had been slowing down, ready for a critical encounter with the giant planet, after which it was named. Shall we warm up Maury and Tony? Asked Serge. No, let them be. We'll defrost them as we get into orbit, Chris answered. Actually, he had no wish to awaken his friends until he was sure that they were not going to crash into the planet. If Control had miscalculated, there was no point in arousing the other two to share the agony of the last headlong rush. Chris remembered his briefing about the frozen planet, and he believed it was believed to have an atmosphere about 2,000 miles deep, consisting mainly of methane and some ammonia and helium. Below that was a layer of ice at least 6,000 miles thick, and beneath that must be the core of the planet, more than 12,000 miles of rock. Because of their velocity, the ship would need in addition to the deceleration of the chemical motor, to use atmospheric braking to help attain the right speed. Too high a velocity and the planet's gravity would be insufficient to pull the ship around it. If the speed was too slow, the powerful attraction of Neptune would claw the ship and its crew into an icy embrace. and there was nothing any of them could do. With his three companions, Chris must await the outcome of the delicate balance of forces with what fortitude he could muster. Even now, the signal that would start the chemical motor was streaking across space towards them. Um, when it arrived, the motor would roar to life and the ship would shudder under its tremendous power. Chris felt utterly helpless. He could only wait. His mind was working a little more clearly now since the radio message he'd forced himself to think, and gradually he was overcome by the torpor into which he had sunk. If they survived the circuit of Neptune and the ship could really be put into a course back to Earth, the old problem remained. Wouldn't it be better for two of them to go back safely rather than for all to die? Of course, he'd given his word to whatever the future had in store. All four of them would face it together, but wouldn't he be justified in breaking his word if it would ensure the survival of two of his friends? Would deception be justified if it saved life? There would, of course, be another problem. He would never be awake alone. At the moment, his companion Serge could be. At the moment, his companion was Serge. Could he persuade the Russian to go back on his promise and slip with him out into space? Maury and Tony would slumber on in their frozen sleep until Earth was reached. Then it would be too late to accept the sacrifice that Serge and he had made. Perhaps they could even forgive him for breaking his word. While Chris was still arguing with himself, the signal from the Cape arrived. Obediently, the huge motor roared into life, and he felt himself thrust fiercely into the depths of his contour couch. So great was the pressure that he would find difficulty in speaking, particularly in his much weakened state. For the moment, he needed not face up to the decision he'd been trying to reach. Everyone of the astronauts had experienced hundreds of liftoffs under great thrust. During training, they had consistently endured spells of high G and had become quite used to it, but this time, perhaps because of lack of food, Chris lost consciousness under the tremendous push of the motor. Serge, too, succumbed to the intense physical stress. Thus, as the spaceship approached Neptune, all four members of the crew lay still and silent. A tense Sir Benson paced the long main room at the Cape Kennedy control. Precise calculations had been made of the timing of the signal to activate Neptune 1's motor. The ship's velocity had been reduced considerably under the gentle and unnoticeable thrust of the ion drive, but the final adjustment had to be made with the chemical rocket engine, and there would be no way of learning the result because of the immense distance. A signal took 3.5 hours to pass between Earth and the ship. In that time, too much could happen. When would they know if the ship had entered a planetary orbit, shot away into space, or smashed itself on the frozen surface? The event would be long over before the answer reached Earth. No wonder Whiskers thought Benny looked so grim and white. The tracking signal is still coming in, Mr. Gillianders told his chief, but both men knew that this meant little. Even now, Neptune 1 and its crew could have been destroyed, while the signals that all was well would continue to arrive. Even after another 2 hours, those signals were still picked up. It would show, at least, that the ship had not been destroyed, but they would not learn until later whether Neptune 1 was continuing on into the void or circling obediently around the planet. Not until he received another verbal message from Chris would the director's anxieties be lessened. Sir George dreaded the ship's journey back to Earth. He would have to hear his friend's message messages to the end, and they would die one by one. He more than half hoped that Neptune 1 would smash into the planet. How long he'd been unconscious, Chris had no idea. Gradually, he became aware that he was still alive. Next, he realized that he was lying on his contour couch, and the crushing force of the rocket motor had died away. He tried to move his arms. He tried to move his arm, but found he couldn't. That was strange. If the motor had finished its job, they should be in free fall. He should be weightless and be able to sit up and move about as lightly as a feather. For a moment, panic possessed him. Had he suddenly become paralyzed? He must try again, for he would have to operate the AHA, to say nothing of reporting observation to the planet, or of the planet. It was no use. He just couldn't move a limb. There was only one thing to do. He must let Serge know that he must take over. He tried to call out and realized that he hadn't made a sound. For a very good reason. He couldn't move any of the muscles of his face. Again, he felt filled with alarm. Was this a new kind of space sickness that had struck him? Was Serge suffering too? A length of cable that must have been left lying around was floating about the cabin like a large, thin flying snake. So they were definitely in free fall, and his immobility was not caused by high thrust. Okay. We've been reading Neptune 1 is Missing, a book by Hugh Walters. If you like this content, then make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, or if you want to join the Discord server, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.